check. Cool. Good, good. Okay. Find keynote. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is my talk I've entitled A Continuous Journey. This talk is about the demystification of DevOps, Agile, and continuous integration. And I looked it up. Demystification is a word. I thought maybe I made that one up. I hope that my experiences in the last little while will help others down their path to building better software. So, a little warning, this may be opinionated and philosophical at points. I make no promises to make the best out of the next 25 minutes of your life, but at the very least we'll have pizza for you at that time. So, as mentioned before, my name is Aaron Fay. I'm the development manager at Strathcom Media, which means I work with a team of awesome people building software for the automotive industry. I've been in dev for about 15 years, and I started off in this industry just kind of doing whatever I could find with no formal education in computer science. And I'm just starting now to feel like I'm not making a mess as I go along. One of these days I'll be a good software developer. So I think a lot about software development and the software development process. And I think it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, this industry, because you can basically get into it with no training whatsoever, an internet connection, a $5 hosting account anywhere, PHP for dummies or whatever your language might be, and a little bit of kind of computer savvy, and boom, you're a software developer. You just need to kind of put one site out there to get a client on the site, and now you're in the industry. And so this is basically how I got into this, except at the time WordPress wasn't really a thing. So I spent a lot those early years just kind of in the wild, working on the internet, with very little feedback about how I was doing in software, except for my clients were happy, and that was kind of the goal of my business at the time. And then one day, I ran into, it just kind of jumped out at me, this qualifier. You're not really a software developer until, and for me, I think the first one was version control. It's kind of like, you're not really a software developer unless you're using version control. It's this thing that you need to version your code. And so I dove into version control and figured that out. And then next it was like Linux. You're not really a software developer unless you're using this platform, or it was an MVC framework, or then it was distributed version control. Now that I got version control down, it's distributed version control, testing, so on and so forth. And it seemed like every step of the way there was one more kind of qualifier for me being a real software developer. So being a diligent, sort of freelance business person and wanting to be a good developer, I started down this road to learn all of these different things, and I knew what I needed to learn, but not really why. And it's not like there's a roadmap for this. It's not like you come out of school and they're like, here's how to be a great software dev. These are the things that you need to do. 1, 2, 3, and you're on your way. You're great. So more recently, one day, many years later, I ran into this sort of ultimate qualifier. You're not really a good software developer until you're doing continuous integration. And I'm going to pull a Brandon Rose here for a second and say, every time I hear one of these words, I'm like, what the hell does that mean? The problem with big words like continuous integration is I'm a smart guy already, so I already think I know what it means. I haven't looked it up. I think I know what this means, continuous integration. And I want to look smart, so I start doing that thing because I think I already know what that means. And since I've defined this big word, I start to use it to mean a lot of things. And it might already mean a lot of things. Sometimes we even make words up, like DevOps. I'm not sure if that's a word. So, anyway. Back to my story. My next big qualifier in the software development journey is this continuous integration thing. So I'm working on a team. We decided we're going to do continuous integration. We're using GitHub, so we're integrating, right? And we're writing tests, so we're testing, right? And I'm looking at these, I'm code reviewing somebody's code, and I'm looking at these tests thinking, I'm not sure if these tests pass. And in order to find this out, I've got to pull down this branch and run these tests, and this is one more step on my process. It's not really something I want to do. So we make the decision one day. We're going to set up the CI server, and we're going to have the CI server run tests for us. And it's probably Jenkins. And every CI server from that day forth will be lovingly and hatefully known as Jenkins. We still call our Bamboo server Jenkins sometimes. But it's like a 3-week battle just to get that first project to build. It's just like, there's something challenging there. But it's a truly glorious moment. The very first time that green bar lights up, right there. This pull request can automatically be merged and all is well. Something ran the test suite. And if you haven't seen this before, this is, if you tie your continuous integration server back into a tool like GitHub, you can push the build status back and it will give you a red light or green light when things are good to go. So the first time this happened, this was like, whoa, this is amazing. This is so fantastic. And for me, that was my first real moment why I was learning all of these things. And that why was feedback. I was getting feedback from something in my system that was telling me whether I could proceed with this or not. So we got this to build. The next natural step is automated deployment. Let's go. And I got to tell you, automated deployment is something else, but the payoff is equally as glorious. This is a snapshot of we use Elastic Bamboo for deployment and build automation. And this is a successful build in one of our systems. It took 6 minutes of some computer's life somewhere to run off and deploy this system. And immediately we get notifications when those builds succeed or when they fail. This is Jenkins. That little red bar. We still have lots of those. So after all this hard work, and this is weeks and this is maybe months, I really start to think about automation and automating all of these things. Because now there's all of these possibilities. If I can get this build server to run these tests, if I can get this build server to deploy my code, then there's all of this stuff that we can do, integration testing, zero downtime updates. Oh, it's going to play that for me. Boom, my mind is blown. And there's all these tools. Everything from configuration, orchestration, there's cloud stacks, there's all of these things to make this amazing process work for you. But there's still no roadmap. And it's not clear where to get started and where to stop. So I've come here today to just offer my take on this continuous journey. Agile methodology is relating to or denoting a method of project management used especially for software development is characterized by the division of tasks in short phases, work frequency. It's like, what does that mean? Sorry. And for me, or for our team, Agile really means continuous flexibility. The ability for a team, a software team, to react to the current needs of the business. It seems to me that the current needs of the business are an inevitability. They're going to change day to day. And so Agile's come up with a way, a set of recommended best practices, how your team can respond to things. It makes teams accountable to each other because there's constant communication going on. Continuous integration is the practice in software engineering of merging all developer working copies with shared main timelines several times a day. But really it can mean a lot of things. It just means keeping your code in sync. The original problem continuous integration was solving is big companies would spend months and months and months on a feature branch doing some development, and then they'd hit what they called the integration phase, and they'd spend 3 months or more getting their feature branch back into their main code. But nowadays, continuous integration can mean, you called it CI server, continuous integration server. You probably run your tests here. You probably lint and build here and package. Continuous delivery is a best practice. I just pulled this off the internet. It's still one of those things. It's like, what does this mean? It means tests are passing. Your builds are building. Why not deploy them too? Even your branches. And this is something that we've picked up as a practice at Strathcom, we're still getting good at, is we've got the branches, we've got the build server packaging this stuff up, so we've started to deploy them so that we can have people look at those branches before we ship them off to the next stage line. Package and test absolutely everything. Try and get features in front of your clients as soon as possible. And again, this comes back to kind of reacting to customer demands. The business needs, which I think everybody in this room, if you're a software developer, you understand that the client's going to want a different thing tomorrow than what they asked today. Or you're going to build a thing and put it in front of them and they'll say, well, that's really nice, but can you put that thing over there? Can you change this? Or, oh, maybe that doesn't, that's not what I thought you were going to build. Continuous delivery is about delivering as soon as possible in small amounts. And get good at the hard stuff. Something that our sysadmin would say repeatable, reliable, testable. Something that we can do over and over again. And this stuff is hard, so it's important to get good at it. DevOps is a software development methodology that stresses communication, collaboration, and integration between software developers. First time I heard DevOps, I thought, what does that mean? And right out of the gate, I thought DevOps meant our software teams are going to be like, our developers are operators. You know, just like give everybody SSH keys and here's the cloud and go play with them. Deploy your code. And it certainly doesn't mean that. DevOps is about continuous feedback. And for us, there's several stages in this, but at the 1 minute stage, or somewhere therein, 1 to 5 minutes, it's about getting immediate feedback that my unit tests are going to pass or fail. And they're just, unit tests are focused on one specific piece of the application, or one context of the application. And the second stage is maybe a functional testing stage where the code is out there, branch is out there somewhere, and somebody's poking through it to see if it's doing the thing that we said it was going to do. And so maybe this is 30 minutes, or maybe it's an hour. The third stage for us is maybe an integration stage where it's got past kind of the functional testing wall, and now we can run some integration tests against that to see if it's plugging in well and playing nice with some of this other stuff. And so maybe that's at the 1 day point, or maybe it's after several hours, or maybe there's a few days before we get to that stage. The next one might be an internal review. If you're using an agile-like process, or if you're using sprints or something within your team, then this one might be like a retrospective where you sit down with your stakeholder, your client, and say, see what we built? This is what you asked for a week ago or 2 weeks ago. This is what we want to give you. Is this right or not? And then the fifth stage is kind of the public feedback. So all of these stages, you kind of run the gauntlet. You're at that point now and getting that stuff out there, and now you're going to get your feedback from your end user and find out if that thing that you thought your customers wanted really is the thing that they want. And this is what DevOps really is. It's about getting stuff out of the way so you can get your code online. Because I hear about horror stories about companies that take 2 years to build a piece of software, a feature, and get it out into the real world, and then it's not really, is it really valid anymore with the way how fast the internet changes? And it's interesting to me how agile DevOps and continuous integration and all of these terms are really about the same thing. They're really about a state of continuous feedback in your software systems. And I think we've all seen one or more of these pictures. This is the one in the middle is just the agile methodology. A couple of these are DevOps. And they're really all about the same thing, about getting a process of feedback into your software systems. And I think probably last, for me, and most importantly, is the concept of continuous improvement. The world is full of developers. If you suck as a dentist, you'll go out of business, but you can suck as a software developer for a long time. And that's not to say that you're not getting better, it's just that there's so much to know in this industry. And you might have someone on your team that isn't quite as good as the rest of the people on your team. Are you giving that person feedback? Do they know where their skill set is at? And it's really easy to, as a new developer, to get on the internet and have a question, to jump on Stack Overflow, and I type that in, and it's like a flame war, and now I'll never touch Stack Overflow again because the internet hates me, but I'm still going to continue on my path down the road to developing software for this client. I talk about the concept of developer rot once. It was more of a rant on my blog than anything. It's just the idea that if code can have rot, code sits somewhere and it never gets maintained, it's off in the system. Then they call it code rots over time, and I think developers can rot over time too. Because it's easy to get stuck into a fixed way of thinking about a particular problem or solving a particular problem. And kind of a testament to this is I really love Python. Perl has taught me so much as I go up and down about Perl and I have a hard time with it sometimes. I've learned so much about software development, the ideas of the community, and just concepts within the language that make me a better developer. And I think for teams, continuous improvement is about holding each other accountable. Saying, I think you can do this better, or why did you do this? Or, I don't like the way that you did that, this is why. So some other just kind of ideas, thoughts, or tips for those who might be interested. One thing that I've learned from our team, and especially our systems admin, is define your problem and requirements first. Does it need to scale? Or does that just sound like fun? Because scaling is really, really hard. I mean, lots of systems out there make this really easy for us, but it's a hard problem to solve. It's one thing to just go deploy a piece of code on some auto-scaling system, but that doesn't mean that you're done. What kind of availability? It's important to ask all of the questions about what do we really need before we build this thing. I think it's important to get it working first and then adjust it later. And the example I thought of for this was if you can put a system, or we put a system in place where our team can deploy code just by closing pull requests. And it wasn't pretty behind the scenes. The bash scripts that the Jenkins server was running were monstrous and scary, and they were impossible to maintain. But it was working. And then later on down the road, we could change that over to a different system, and people were still deploying code closing pull requests. I really like the concept of deploy on day one or sprint zero, and this is kind of I think it's an extreme programming concept. Just getting the infrastructure stuff out of the way on day one so that every single time somebody's closing a pull request, the code is just deploying, even if it's the first line of code, even if it's just a README file. Get that stuff out of the way, because it's really hard to get 3 months into a project and then realize that all of this stuff that we've done doesn't work with this infrastructure we want to deploy on, and now we need to go back. On the topic of simplicity, I think try everything and then use the thing that was easiest. There's so many systems out there. There's so many ways to deploy and competing cloud infrastructures and tools for automation and all of these different things. I think it's really important to pick the one that was easiest to use, because it's really easy to make things hard, and it's really super hard to make things easy. And a mistake that I've learned is don't have your devs deploy code, have servers deploy code. It's really hard to go back from this one. And it's much easier to blame the CI server if something goes wrong. So, and strongly opinionated slide here. The final word on testing. You don't write tests to prove that your code works. You write tests to prove you can change it later. And you don't really understand this until you have millions of visitors on your site running on this system that has all of these modules, and there's one module at the core, and you need to make a change, and there's no unit tests. And then it just becomes so obvious why those tests are important. And everything I've talked about here today is absolutely useless if you don't have a solid, reliable test suite. And above all else, if I've learned anything in 15 years of software development, it's that simplicity is king. I think I struggle day to day to write software that doesn't become complex. It's super easy to make things hard, and it's super hard to make things easy. But I'll take 5 or 6 lines of code that are super, super clear over top of a magical one-liner. And everyone else on your software team will thank you as well. So, I'm still getting good at this continuous journey. And I'd just like to say, how do you do it? I'd appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. I'm a little hot. So, oh, it's just.
Specific question, more general? You talked about specific work, so you say you always also deploy your branches as well.
So this is just a habit that we picked up to facilitate functional testing, to have someone, what we found that we were doing was we would get a bunch of code in a pull request. We'd have code review on the pull request. We'd close the pull request. We'd move, so we're using like a Kanban style or sprint boards or something like that. We'd move the ticket into the functional testing column. The ticket would fail the functional testing column, and then it would go all the way back into the beginning of the queue, and then kind of have to go through that process again. So we decided to try a system where if we have a deployment project like an application or something, and we have quite a few, then we would, every time somebody opened a branch on, say, GitHub or whatever, then the CI server would just pick that up and deploy that branch and notify somebody and say, hey, you can go play with this here, kind of its own little sandbox. And then once that would be like the functional testing stage, and then we move that along into pull request. The pull request comes, or the code review comes after the functional testing in that particular case. So we do get into a scenario where it kind of fails the other way, in that it passes functional testing, but then it fails the code review, and then we kind of have to, so you go back and change the code, and then you sort of want to functionally test that again and make sure it works. But anyway.
And so how long is it taking your team to get here, and how much like attrition or arm twisting has there been?
So get here is a subjective term. I would say we have the majority of our deployment projects, and we have about at least a dozen or 20 of those main ones. So we do deployment, auto deployment on all of our deployment, which are like applications or websites or something like that. And then we do auto build and packaging on non-deployment projects, so like a library or something like that. It's been at least, it's been about a year and a half, and I don't know that we're here per se, but we're mostly here. We're at the last mile where we're still solving some problems with integration testing and really, really high level, kind of like the hard stuff. So, but about a year and a half. I think for the most part, it's never been a problem of people wanting to test or people wanting to be involved, pick up these ideas, like be involved in this process. It's more been, how do we do it? And it's sort of back to that simplicity, like testing. Conceptually, I'd hear lots of people talk about, I don't remember what talk it was, one of the PyCon talks, some guy was like, yeah, I wrote all the tests for my presentation tonight on the plane on the way here, like I love testing that much. And I thought, wow, that guy really loves testing. But conceptually, testing in general just makes you think about your software sort of backwards, and it's something that even I look at a piece of code, and it's hard for me to write the test first. Sometimes test-driven development's challenging for me to get into first. So it's just one of those things. If you can make testing easy for your people, or if testing is easy, people will do it. And if it's hard, then people won't. And I'll just leave it at that. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
That last point is hugely important. If it's not easy, you won't get that.
Yeah.
This stuff is hard.
Yep. Agreed. Automation is hard. Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
So now that you have continuous deployment set up, how do you deal with like data migrations or other possible downtime?
So data migration, we still do manually in most cases. It comes down to, and we've tried a lot of different things, and that's specifically one problem we haven't solved, in that we've tried a few different things. And on the CMS product, we were just trying to find that magical combination of Django commands, syncdb commands would like just migrate things perfectly every single time, and kind of South's already baked in. And we just found that like it's a thing that we have to do manually for the time being, and we just try to keep the migrations to a minimum. Did that?
Do you, like, I guess, use
Yeah, and what we were trying was we would take, basically on deployment, we'd have a running instance of the database, and we would just basically do like a write lock, spin up a new copy of that database, run the migrations on the new database, and then switch the application. So it would be like a successful build. The last step would be like flip over the database to the new system. And it's one of those things where it's just super easy to get the stuff wrong. So we had some success with it, but I think it's something we'll come back to again. But we finally decided that it's kind of back to like do you need it? Are we migrating data enough that we need to automate this step? Maybe, you know, if we're only doing it every 3 months, let's just do it manually for now until we need to change that. So, because we deploy a lot of stuff. So, any other questions? Dan.
So, from my perspective, a lot of your original milestones in the developer that you've done really do potentially relate to a single developer. How do you feel that this concept relates to different team sizes? Is this relevant to a single person starting out himself?
I would say if you ever want anyone ever to work in your code, if you ever plan ever to have another person in your code, then yeah, everything applies. And it takes more time consuming as a single individual, but the bigger teams get, I think the more, I think it's relevant at a team of 2, but it just becomes, the implications of not going down this road as early as possible just seem to magnify in a horrible way. If you don't fix some of the problems up front, by the time your team grows or scales, you realize that you need to, then it's really hard to turn around and fix the problem. Did that answer your question? Yeah, I think it certainly applies. So.
I disagree.
Sure, Brian, go ahead.
I think it's useful for a single developer to think of yourself today, where you are 6 months from now. Looking back, working on that old code, having some nets and ropes to keep it from falling too far are helpful. Kind of like after that.
And I guess just to touch on that, I don't blog very much, but I have a blog online, and I just set up a really simple CI server to just troll GitHub repo. When I post something to this repo, I don't want to it's just a static file generator, so it pulls it down and builds that out or whatever. But it just seems like the tools are out there. It makes so much sense to put it in place. I don't have to think about the server, where it runs, what it's doing. I just need to close a pull request or push to that branch, and it just goes live. It's sort of quick and easy like FTP, but there's a lot more work in between. So.
I think one of those points are useful for single development, as in particular, if you're working on a block of code today and 6 months or next year, you have to come back to it. Customer are very helpful, very informative, getting your mind back to where the intent was and the capability.
At the very least, geez, I worked on this 6 months ago. How does it work? Oh, test passed. Whatever. On we go. Yeah. Any other questions?
I've got one.
Sure.
So it's called continuous.
Yeah.
Yet it's all based upon events that are adjacent to each other. So I'm just saying, maybe it should be called contiguous integration instead of continuous.
Thanks, Abram. It's good feedback.
I had to look it up to make sure I was right.
Okay. I appreciate the feedback. I had to look up a few things to make sure I wasn't using them the wrong way, and apparently I missed one. So. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you very much. Did you want this computer?